Common Romance was the language in which all Romance languages came from. A few of these languages include Arpitan, Venetian, and many others. One of these languages is called Portugalician, which birthed many languages, including Aeonavian, Fala, Galician, and today's subject, Portuguese. See, when splitting out from Latin between 409 to 711 CE, these different dialects of Latin were considered Common Latin. In other words, they were spoken by the common people, rather than the Latin spoken by the educated. During the fall of the Western Roman Empire, however, widespread migration caused various tribes to come into contact with each other, including Germanic tribes adopting Latin as a consequence. After 711 CE, the Umayyad conquest that took control of the entire peninsula, Arabic became the language used by conquering Arabs. As such, all Romance languages within the Iberian Peninsula today have Arabic loanwords. Also common was Mozarabic. These were Romance dialects with Arabic influence, spoken by Christian communities. The southern regions had more Arabic influence than the north, due to the northern areas returning the Christian rule sooner. Portugal reconquered its land by 1249, as with Spain in 1492. Prior to this, the peninsula was broken up into various kingdoms. The county of Portugal split from the kingdom of Galicia, originally from the kingdom of Leon in 1139, where it spread southwards. As such, Arabic has left a significant amount of vocabulary in modern Portuguese. A few examples: the word for cabbage,
alface,
from Arabic,
الخس,
the word for village,
aldeia,
from,
الضيعة,
and the word for warehouses,
armazém,
from Arabic.
المخزن.
Many of these loanwords have a or al in Portuguese, which come from Arabic's definite article.
ال.
Also note that in Arabic, the first consonant of the noun would sometimes assimilate with the definite article. This is a very common thing in Arabic, and some of this influence was retained in Portuguese. By 1290, the first university in Portugal, the University of Coimbra, was established. King Alfonso decreed Portuguese as the new language of instruction, rather than just using Latin. In the 1500s, explorer Vasco da Gama went on his voyage around Africa and Southeastern Asia, returning as the first European to cross the world, prior to the Europeans quote-unquote discovering the Americas. During this voyage, and thus during the first wave of European colonization, Portuguese began to be used as a lingua franca. In other words, it became a unifying language everyone could speak in order to communicate. As a consequence, new Pidgin and Creole languages began to emerge in the areas under Portuguese control, not only in Africa and in Asia, but in some parts of South America as well. The 1800s helped accelerate the spread of various European empires, from the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, etc., especially with these powers trying to dominate the Americas, some more successful than others. But with more developments in various new countries, Portuguese came to be the new official language of them, rather than the native languages. Portuguese has official language status in Portugal, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, São Tomé and Príncipe, Cabo Verde, East Timor, and Macau. The total number of speakers is over 110 million, though I should point out that this includes L2 speakers, people who speak it as a second language, around 25 million of them. So, what is Portuguese like? Phonology and orthography. In this section, we're going to look at some consonants that are different from English. First, the letter R. In Portuguese, R represents a voiced uvular fricative sound, r, if it starts a word or is doubled. Otherwise, it's pronounced as an alveolar tap, r. An example being the word for fast.
rápido,
I should point out now that the IPA transcriptions that you're going to see will be different from that from the audio. That's because these are going to be transcribed the way they would normally sound in Portuguese, rather than they would isolated like in these examples. The letter L is pronounced as ul, the L at the end of the word feel, ul. This is called the dark L. An example is the word for moon.
lua,
Next, S and Z. Like English, they're pronounced as s and z respectively, but in many contexts, they can sound like sh and j. Before a devoiced consonant, or before a pause, S and Z are sh. An example is the word for party.
festa,
As such, before a voiced consonant, they're pronounced as j. An example being the word for same.
mesmo,
The letter X. This is going to be a little confusing because X can be pronounced as either sh, z, or English x. When starting a word, or if it's before another consonant, or after a diphthong or between two vowels, it's sh. An example being the word for syrup.
Xarope.
And the word for short,
Baixo.
if x is between e and another vowel, it's z. An example being the word for exam.
Exame.
Next, LH and NH. These two represent palatal sounds, ly and ny, which some English speakers may need to practice on. For example, the word for proud,
Orgulho.
and the word for no, as in the determiner.
Nenhum.
Vowels have three classes, high, mid, and low, but depending on the dialect, this schwa doesn't exist. Alongside these three classes of vowels, there are also diacritics. Diacritics help show which class of vowel is in the word. For acute accent, they're going to be high vowels, alongside e and u, which are low vowels. For a circumflex, they represent mid vowels. There's also the grave accent, which is used to combine the preposition a, meaning at, with a demonstrative. There's also the tilde, which are used for a and o. These two represent nasal vowels. Typically, when an m or an n comes after a vowel, or with a tilde, the vowel becomes nasalized. An example being the word for apple.
Maçã.
In this word, we can also see something called the cedilla. It's used for the sound s, and is used before a, o, or u, and the adjective for well is
Bem.
One part of Portuguese phonology is stress timing. Similar to English, Portuguese is a stress-timed language, where stressed syllables are heard more prominently than unstressed syllables, meaning that unstressed syllables will not be heard as much. For example, the word for important.
Importante.
In any word ending with e, the e vowel isn't pronounced in most cases. If it is, it's usually a short vowel. As such, many vowels get reduced in speech, like o being pronounced as u in this case.
Importante.
Let's go over some grammar and see how Portuguese works. This sentence means Matilda loves her cat.
A Matilda ama o seu gato.
Every word corresponds to English. But what about these? These are definite articles, which come before the noun, or in the case of Matilda, they come before a name if you're not talking to them specifically. Most masculine nouns will end with o, and as such, most feminine nouns end with a. For example, the short cat is,
O gato baixo.
and the small cup is,
A taça pequena.
though in some cases in Portuguese, the adjective is followed by the copula verb, in other words, the verb meaning to be. These noun endings are the same for adjectives, and, for the most part, come after the noun, but sometimes can come before it. For nouns with e, their gender can either be masculine or feminine, so you need to memorize the gender of those ones.
O seu.
Is an example of a possessive adjective. These are followed by a definite article and come before the noun, which agrees with it in gender and number.
Ama.
Is the third person singular form of
Amar.
meaning to love. Portuguese has four classes of verbs: adverbs,
Amar.
adverbs,
Comer.
adverbs,
Cumprir.
and adverbs.
Compor.
Or being the least common verb ending in Portuguese. Some of them are conjugated slightly differently, but of course there are plenty of exceptions with irregular verbs. Here's a sentence meaning I gave him a choice.
Eu dei-lhe uma escolha.
Earlier we saw definite articles. In this sentence we can see the indefinite article.
Uma.
Like definite articles, indefinite articles also inflect for gender and number.
Eu.
Is an example of a subject pronoun. For the second person singular and plural, the forms
O senhor.
and
A senhora.
are used, like sir or madam, but that depends on the person you're speaking to. Portuguese is a pro-drop language, meaning that the subject pronoun can be dropped because the verb agrees with the subject, so you can drop the subject pronoun, but in Portuguese is often included, due to the stress timing that I mentioned earlier.
Le.
Is an object pronoun. Unlike other Romance languages, object pronouns come right after the verb, rather than before it. This set here is for indirect object pronouns. For the direct object pronouns, they're the same for the most part, except for the third person. They use the definite articles, which we saw earlier.
Dei.
Is the first person singular form of
Dar.
meaning to give in the preterite tense. The preterite form, or the simple past tense, corresponds to English's past and perfect tenses. A perfect tense exists, but it's used for the perfected progressive. So something like I've been giving him the book. This would be
Eu tenho-lhe dado livro.
This construction has the verb
Ter.
meaning to have, plus the past participle of the verb. There are two past participle endings. For all verbs, they're ath, and for every other verb, it's id. Notice that in this case, the object pronoun comes in between the verb and the past participle. We're going to the store.
Estamos a ir ao mercado.
In this sentence, we see how the present progressive works. It uses the verb
Estar.
meaning to be in a temporary sense, plus the preposition a, which we saw earlier, meaning to, alongside the verb in the infinitive form. This is the going to future tense in Portuguese, which many languages have, alongside English and other Romance languages. But a more explicit future form can be used. So the sentence we will go to the store in Portuguese, that's
Iremos ao mercado.
this is the future conjugation of the verb
Ir.
meaning to go. Future conjugations have the infinitive with conjugations from the verb
Haver.
attached to it.
Ao.
Is an example of a contraction. These will vary depending on the preposition and determiner. While these work for definite articles, they also work for demonstratives and indefinite articles. Note that in casual speech, many more contractions occur that don't exist in formal speech. Portuguese has lots of complexities, some small, some big. All languages do, but with the shared vocabulary between English and Portuguese, you'll be able to pick up on words much quicker. But of course, a lot of these grammatical structures will need practice. While many Portuguese speakers can also communicate in English, being able to speak in another language is a reward in its own right. I'm curious about something, however. The speakers of Romance languages, which parts of Portuguese do you find similar or different to your own language? And the speakers of other Portuguese varieties, which parts of Portuguese do you find hardest to understand, depending on the dialect? Leave the answers to those questions in the comments down below. I'd like to thank the viewers for watching this little video of mine. It's crazy to think that Langfiles started 3 years ago. Maybe this show will go for a long time. Maybe it won't. But I enjoy making these type of videos, so I'd like to thank you all for watching. Until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, peace.